Have you ever just stopped and wondered how a full-length movie can just appear on your TV basically instantly? Well, I can tell you it's not magic. It's actually one single incredibly clever trick. And today we're going to pull back the curtain on the single most important technique that makes everything from Netflix to YouTube even possible.
So, here's our game plan. First, we're going to wrap our heads around why streaming should be impossible. Then, we'll expose the big secret of something I call the lazy codec. After that, we'll get into its wild copy-paste time machine, see how it cleans up its own messes, and then we'll boil it all down to a super simple 2-ingredient recipe.
All right, first things first. We have to understand just how mind-boggling this whole thing is. The question is pretty straightforward, but the numbers are just huge. How on earth do you fit something as massive as a movie through a relatively tiny internet connection?
No, really think about that for a second. We are talking about millions upon millions of colored dots on your screen changing 30, 60, sometimes even more times every single second. How does that much data not just bring the entire internet to a screeching halt?
Because here's the reality check. Raw, totally uncompressed video is astronomically huge. If a streaming service tried to send you the full, raw data for every single frame, forget it. It would be a complete disaster. Your stream would buffer for days. It's completely impossible.
And that brings us to the secret, the trick that this lazy codec uses. The entire solution is built on a ridiculously simple observation about video. Most of what you're seeing from one moment to the next isn't actually new information.
Now, the super technical term for this is temporal redundancy. But really, that's just a fancy way of saying that from one frame to the next, a massive chunk of the picture stays exactly the same. Time is moving forward, but the image itself barely budges. This becomes crystal clear if you just picture a news broadcast. The news anchor is talking, sure, but what's not moving? The background behind them, the desk they're sitting at, that little live news graphic in the corner, all of it is completely frozen in place.
And just how much is static? You'd be shocked. In a lot of scenes, it's easily 95% of the pixels on your screen. Only a tiny little 5% is actually changing. So sending that same 95% of data over and over and over again, 30 times a second, that is just unbelievably wasteful.
And to avoid all that waste, we use something called a video codec. The best way to think about a codec is that it's designed from the ground up to be lazy. Its entire job, its whole philosophy, is to look at the video and just keep asking itself one question. Why in the world would I do the work of sending anything that hasn't changed?
So how does this lazy approach actually play out? Well, this is where the copy-paste time machine comes in. The whole goal is to describe what's changing on screen without ever having to resend the original pixels. This is where it gets really, really clever. The codec looks at the current picture in little tiny blocks, and for every single block, it acts like a detective. It travels back in time to the frame that just happened a split second ago, and it hunts for a block of pixels that's a perfect match. It's looking for stuff that has just moved. Okay, so our detective finds a perfect match. Say, a piece of the background from one moment ago that perfectly matches a piece of the background right now. The obvious next step would be to just send that block of pixels it found, right?
Nope, absolutely not. That would be completely pointless. You'd just be sending the exact same pixels you were trying so hard to avoid. Instead, our lazy codec does something way, way smarter. It sends a tiny, incredibly efficient instruction.
It sends something called a motion vector. Now, this is the key to everything. A motion vector is in pixels. It's not a picture. It's just a tiny instruction. Think of it like a treasure map. It's a little note that tells your phone or TV, hey, you already have the pixels you need to build this part of the new picture. Just go back to the old one, look at these coordinates, and copy what you find there.
The difference in efficiency here is it's night and day. Sending the actual pixels is like trying to mail a full-size painting across the country. But sending a motion vector, that's like just texting someone the treasure map coordinates. One is huge, heavy, and slow. The other is practically weightless and instantaneous.
Okay, so that's brilliant for things that are perfectly still or just sliding around. But, in the real world, the match isn't always perfect. So what happens then? Well, this is all about fixing that imperfect copy. So here's the other part of the trick. The codec does a quick bit of math. It looks at the original block it was trying to send, and it subtracts the block it copied from the past. And that tiny little error, the leftover stuff, that has a name. It's called the residual.
And here's the beautiful part. Because the guess from the past frame is usually so good, the residual is almost empty.
It's like a ghostly image that only shows the tiniest, most minor changes. Maybe the light shifted a little bit. It's so boring and has so little information that sending it across the internet costs almost nothing.
And that brings us to the grand finale, where we can finally put all the pieces together. This whole complicated-sounding process can actually be boiled down to a dead simple 2-ingredient recipe that powers pretty much every video you've ever watched online. So, what's the recipe for almost every piece of a streaming video? It's just 2 things. First, you have a motion vector. That's our treasure map, telling your device where to copy from. And second, you have a tiny residual. Think of it as a little bottle of digital touch-up paint to fix any tiny imperfections in the copy. And that's it. That is the whole trick.
Which leaves us with one final, kind of mind-bending question. If almost every single frame you see is built by copying pixels from a frame that came before it, how does the very first frame get made? How does the whole video even get started in the first place? Well, that's a story for another time.